Module 2, HX History and Roots, an HX Origin Story. The story of how we transform computers into mass-market consumer products is also the origin story of user experience, customer experience, and the human experience of work. Back in the 1960s and 70s, computers were the sole domain of computer scientists. You had to be a programmer to operate a computer, and computers were huge. They took up several rooms, the opposite of a personal computer we find today. It is well known that Steve Jobs and others had the dream to make computers and other technology something that ordinary people could use and understand. How did they do that? What kinds of new tools or methods did they have to invent to enable this explosion in personal tech over the last 4 decades? What they invented is now known as human-centered design, and most of them were on a team at Xerox PARC Labs that was hired by Steve Jobs to create the first personal computer, the Macintosh or Mac. In its first year of advertising, it was known as the computer for the rest of us, meaning the computer for those of us without degrees in computing. Mac's 1984 advertisement hinted that the PC would liberate us from dominant ideology and encourage individual expression through the power of a computer that could be owned by anyone. And this is the story of how they did it. Lawrence Tesler was there for almost every key invention around PCs. He wanted PCs to do everything that other tools did and expand to new capabilities. To do this, he interviewed ordinary people, talked about the problems that they were trying to solve, and then brought these problems into the design of the Macintosh. He would interview the receptionist at the front desk to find out how she typed letters. How did she make copies? How did she make changes or corrections? What was the problem she was trying to solve when she wrote different kinds of letters? He used this information to try to construct a design for the Macintosh that could do the same thing. Lawrence Tesler was also there and was the first person to use a laptop in an airport and on an airplane. He developed the ability to do copy-paste. He developed the idea and the term user-friendly. He also was part of the team that developed the first web browsers, Wi-Fi, and the RISC processor and other processors that are at the basis of all the mobile devices that we use today. He developed these things using what we now know as human-centered design. Other people who are part of this team include Alan Kay, who is considered the father of PCs today. He also did extensive testing and interviewing and observation of people to try to develop the personal computer. Tim Mott did rigorous user testing. Once they had a prototype, he would bring in ordinary people, sometimes the FedEx person who is delivering packages to the building, sat them down in front of a computer and said, try this out. I want to see how easy this is for you. This is how they developed the first user interfaces, the first mouse, and some of the other things that we see today in our computers. Susan Kerr was a graphics designer brought in by Steve Jobs as part of this team. She helped to humanize the Mac, created the first user interface, the look and the feel that we see in Apple products today with the very simple font and typeface and the icons that we use. The idea of icons as a way to select different applications on a computer was designed by Susan and her team. Stu Card also used to do a lot of testing and trying to understand the interaction between humans, ordinary humans, and the interaction that they had with computers. So along the way, we see some of the things that these people developed. The laptop, different icons, the mouse, copy-paste, handheld devices, the idea of what you see is what you get. So this changed the idea of computers looking like a programming interface to something that was a more common user interface, and the browser and Wi-Fi, as we mentioned. These people also took up lead jobs in companies like Walt Disney as well as Amazon, Atari, EA Sports. So let's talk about some of the other roots of HX and where this went from this design team. So we have these four roots, which we'll talk about. Three of them are core to what we do today in talking about what has happened new. One of these existed before, and that's the root of behavioral science, which many of us already understand and are familiar with. In human-centered design, after this team created the computer for the rest of us, Don Norman, who also worked on this team and who is still active today in human-centered design, created this concept of design thinking. This was picked up also and used in the idea of service design, or how a company delivers its offerings to users. We also see the development of design thinking picked up by the Stanford Design School, by the Hasso-Plattner Institute in Germany, by the company IDEO in 1991. Today, there are many companies who teach human-centered design, design thinking, service design, user experience. We'll talk about these terms a little bit later in later modules. In the root of analytics, we see the idea of market segmentation back in the 1950s with personas. We see the idea of psychographics, or the study and classification of people. We see cognitive analytics, which helps us understand text and semantics and do machine learning and patterning. We see predictive analytics, which helps us decide the likelihood of outcomes and what kinds of things are groups most likely to say. And we also see the rise of people analytics in the last decade, building on the foundations of earlier analytics fields. In the field of behavior science, we see psychology, sociology, neuroscience, behavioral economics. And in the field of agile, which is related to this started with Kanban back in the 1940s with Toyota and production, where people were able to make changes in the production line on the spot and communicate and make improvements within the production line itself, according to needs that were going on. We see also the rise of the concept of lean in 1991, sprint and scrum in 1993, and agile with the Agile Manifesto in 2001. These are all part of what we now know as user experience, customer experience, and the human experience of work. User experience was a term first coined by Don Norman, who became the head designer of user experience at Apple in 1995. Customer experience borrowed that idea and brought it into the marketing realm around 2005. And we see EX or HX coming into being in the last 7 years. This is how we got to where we are today with the human experience of work. Next up, Module 3, what the human experience of work is and what it is not.